Cool. All right. Well, let's get into this. So this is the second episode of Fintech Insider on Air. If you missed the first one of these, I didn't have these lovely gentlemen with me last week, but I did have Simon Vanskaleena from Monzo. And actually, the stuff that he was saying about open banking was super, super interesting. So if you want to go back and check that one out, it's both on the Fintech Insider Twitter and also my one as well. So jump back on that, view that one, see what you think. This week, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. One episode, we're already like flipping that format. And we'll just change it again, why not?
It's always been a life goal to flip a table, but we flipped a format.
It is, well, this is quite heavy. It's got lots of stuff in it. Like...
When you suggested karaoke, I was like, I'm not sure it's going to work. I know. But go for it.
Strap yourself in, guys. So this week, what we're going to be doing actually is, so I put out a list last week of the 11 things because, yes, we're 11FS and I only write things in 11s anymore, unfortunately.
OCD.
It really is, yeah. I take branding to like a really weird level.
You took it to 11.
I did. Sorry. But what we're going to do is we're going to pick out a few of those things that was on that list because it had a really good reaction and actually some really good comments, both telling me that I was mental with some of the things that I'd left out of it, which was quite funny, as well as really sort of constructive comments around actually building or grouping some of those things together. Now, we don't have time to go through all 11 of those things. So if you do want to go and check it out, it's actually my pinned tweet on my Twitter. So if you check that out on there and drop any comments, it'd be really interesting to see what you think. Today, though, the three that we have picked out are the ones that we think are probably most impactful. And actually, when we're sort of talking to banks across the planet, as we do at the moment, humble brag, humble brag, humble brag,
gone globally,
then actually we're in a situation where these are the ones that just keep coming up. And the first of those really is culture. Not just the first in the list when I wrote them, but actually the one that I think is probably the most impactful. And definitely when we're doing various different things with various different organizations, it's the one that is probably the thing that I think is the biggest inhibitor to. And actually probably the one that's the hardest thing for a really, really big organization to actually do anything about. What do you guys think? Like culture in big organizations, kind of any kind, but then financial services as well?
I think it's one of those things where people say, oh yeah, culture, and then have no idea really what they've agreed to. Because it seems to be one of these catch-all words. It's like, I don't know, how people interact. It feels different in a startup or one of those high-performing teams that it doesn't work. So I'm going to label that culture. But I think to me, it means... that like the model people carry inside their head of how the organization works. When they're thinking, actually, can I do this or can I do that? They like model it out. So everyone sort of, and if you have a shared idea of how this all works, then we're all working to that model and you don't get that sort of, that rub. If you go, great, I'm going to do this new thing and launch it with new clients, and that just doesn't fit everyone else's model of how the organization works, then you're in trouble. So I think that's interesting. It's like, what are the key principles of which your organization runs? What's the way in which things get done? What are the taboos? What are the things that are rewarded or you expect to be rewarded? And because we all carry those things, and when you join an organization that's so large, 10,000 people, you can't really change those internal models without some really radical moves that make people go, whoa, that's never happened before. So I think that sort of setting it up in a way, or having people who share that different model of high velocity, customer driven, hard commerciality in terms of what it is we're trying to achieve, really works.
I like that idea of it's those norms, because the norms inside a big bank are typically words like credibility get thrown around. Words like oh, it can't be done here, or it's too hard, or has somebody signed that off? Who needs to say yes? And actually, so I was in South Africa last week, and a lot of the work we were doing with a client there was, it's all right, guys, you can do this. Like, here's the button you push. Like, it's really easy to do something when you give people permission. And ultimately, people are looking for that purpose. They're looking for autonomy, and they're looking for mastery. And that's the feeling that startups give, because there's so much to do that you kind of have to pick things up and do them for yourself. Otherwise, they don't get done. And there is no process, and there is no department that looks after it. So people naturally have that, and hopefully that starts to evolve. And it's hard to do in a large organization. And when I've seen culture transformation inside large organizations, it's often meant that the executive team went away and worked with some really good people to come up with something that meant something to them. But most of the people on the front line have never seen this, never experienced it, and are nowhere near it. So,
it reminds me of the biggest culture change thing I saw was a lot. I've done a lot of sort of consulting for big companies through the years, and I was doing something for a utility company, and they just changed leadership. And the CEO came in one day and said to the director of HR, "It's like, why aren't you wearing a tie?" And the guy said, "Like, well, we don't wear ties. We're in business casual." It's like, we wear ties, like we're professionals, like this is how it's going to be. And that one change suddenly, like it was like his stake in the ground suddenly rippled through, and then suddenly 2 days later, everyone in the place is wearing a tie. But it somehow sort of destabilized that I know how things work here, because something that was really visible that you saw was then changed. And then he went through a variety of other changes, but it started with something really inconsequential.
I have a similar story of a board member at a bank that I used to work at telling me to tuck my shirt in, and I didn't. And it ended differently. But I guess the challenge when you sort of look at a lot of these things, when you look at the culture side of things, is actually like it isn't one culture. I think this is the thing that people kind of forget. It's not just like amorphous blob of
very, very true.
What it stands for. And actually, like increasingly, like banks are having to get good at stuff that they've never had to be good at before. So like an engineering culture is so dramatically different to what it would be to be a banking culture or a design culture. And actually, we talk about like we've used like the cargo cult thing so many times, but trying to like emulate cultures that people want to be like, or have like an aspiration to kind of look like, without really understanding the intent, or actually rolling down the difference or homogenizing a culture to, be this thing that just doesn't work for anybody, but is better than what was there before. Like all of these things kind of need to be thought about. I think the hardest thing for me on culture is always that it's not something that you strategize on and it's fixed. Like if you think of for us, like the struggle is real, right? Like
it's the thing that we worry about.
Yeah,
but I think for us, because we've been through the exercise, what's 11F is about. How would we explain the culture? And that almost takes the felt sense and the shared norms that we have, the little model of how we think it all works, and then try to bring that out and to make it explicit. Because I think it really works when you're in a thing to...
Speaking of culture, did anybody see Anthony back there? He's just being an absolute jerk. I love that guy.
I think it's really easy to have an implicit feeling that we all get it. And then when new people join, it's like, it's like, well, I want to get it too. It's like, well, we've got to explain it. And we've never really explained it. So I find that interesting.
It is. And like I say, it is that constant thing. Like, how do you keep changing? Really interesting question that's come through. So Paul Fledge, so are you noticing any positive cultural changes in any of the large UK-based banks? Yes, thankfully. And actually in many of them, really, it's kind of how they're approaching it. In fact, like there's many, not just UK banks, but global banks are approaching this in sort of various different ways, whether it's, to your point, giving people permission to kind of go and do things. And a lot of people kind of like talk about failing fast, but actually like allowing people the space to go and learn and shape and do. But without losing, we talk about this a lot, but without losing that edge of being crazy commercial focused. If you just sort of create this innovation lab where everybody can play in the safety of their own head, and none of the scissors can really cut you, like these aren't real customers, it's okay. Like that's not really the scenario that you want. You want the permission to do things that are small, that if they fail, don't take down a business line or a product line or end up on the front of the Daily Mail, but are actually constructively teaching you a new way of doing things.
I think that's the key, isn't it? So within 2 days, we were speaking to customers and they were like, this was super hard for them before. They just couldn't get those customer insights. After 2 customer interviews, a genuine bit of feedback was, wow, we've learned more in this 2 customer interviews than we learned in the last 3 years of surveys we bought. Because it was a genuine, raw, honest bit of feedback. And there's a skill in how you ask some of the questions. But it was just like letting go. It's okay to ask these questions. It's okay to go go to the places that, like, there are these taboos. And I think that's the big word, is like culture creates taboos. And actually, whenever you've got that, you've got danger. But I think there was a real appetite at the top of a lot of organizations to start popping some of those and dealing with them. And a good example from a UK bank I heard recently is there's a CEO of a UK bank who's got a kind of a thing where before 9 a.m., no meetings. And if he sees too many people in a meeting room together, 20, 30 people, will walk in and go like, who's doing the real work in here and who's listening? It's like, and where's the work getting done? And I love that point about an engineering culture and understanding why engineers like a certain thing. Why do designers like it? It's like, oh, other design shops, they have these things in them. So I'm going to put a games console and I'm going to put this kind of furniture in here. And it's like, I've done the moves, but it's kind of like, do you remember those old paint by numbers like pictures that you could get, and this bit's red and this bit's green, and I've sort of painted something that looks a bit like the Mona Lisa, but I've never understood how the artist came up with it in the first place. You can't expect me to do the same thing and create new things. I can only copy something that already existed, and I will never get nearly the same results. It will always look not quite the same. I'll never get quite the same results.
But I think it's patchy. I mean, someone asked me recently, we were talking to an exco, and it's like, what do you think about digital transformation and the whole new thing? Like, what's our organization like? And the answer is, it's patchy. You meet teams, you meet groups who just get it better as well as, anyone out there, anyone in the world. And then next door, there's another group who are, who have spent the last 20 years doing compliance or the head of credit cards, and they know how credit cards are. And yeah, digital's great, Jason. We'll have a funky new app, whatever, but my business is just going to stay the same. Thank you very much. So it's interesting still that you suddenly get these road bumps of, you go like, wow, these guys really get it. And then, but they don't. Maybe I'll just start giving badges out. It's like, I get it. You're like, you get it, you get it.
You're not so much.